This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.
Hello and welcome to episode 45, the first installment of the third season of the 1001 Movies podcast, based on the book 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. This week, we'll be talking about Jean Renoir's 1953 comedy drama, The Golden Coach.
At the end of the second act, when Colombine goes, driven away by her masters, there's a tradition you seem not to know. The comedians bow to her.
The son of painter Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Jean Renoir arguably eclipsed his father's career as an artist with his own, creating some of the finest films to ever grace the silver screen. He had already directed 11 films before working on Badu Saved from Drowning in 1932, which cemented his place as a respected director. From there, he made such films as A Day in the Country, Grand Illusion, and The Rules of the Game in France throughout the 1930s, and all of these films are topics for future episodes. In 1940, fleeing war-torn Europe, he came to the United States to make movies, and some would argue that his career plateaued at this point, despite having the financial backing of Hollywood behind him. Here he made films like Swamp Water and The Woman on the Beach in the 1940s, before stumbling upon a book called The River by Rumer Godden, a romance set in India. Renoir courted several studios to help him make the film, but it soon became apparent that Hollywood would insist on adding extraneous details to the film like an obligatory elephant hunt, and he turned to a private financier to help fund the film. The River was perhaps Renoir's inspiration to take a temporary respite from Hollywood, as he soon traveled back to Europe in the early 1950s to make 3 more films, what would eventually be called his stage and spectacle trilogy years later. The first of these was The Golden Coach. Loosely based on Prosper Mérimy's Sacrament of the Golden Coach, the film is set in Peru in the 18th century, a time when European colonists were descending on the native citizens and imposing their own law. A small Commedia dell'arte traveling troupe from Italy descends upon a remote town, ruled over by a powerful but otherwise wise and kindly viceroy. The star of the troupe is the actress Camilla, played by Anna Magnani, who catches the eye of the viceroy when her current beau goes off to fight for the colonies. Camilla also finds herself courted by the local toreador, whom she finds annoying. The titular Golden Coach is the bargaining chip used by the viceroy to attract Camilla's attention, but soon becomes the vehicle, no pun intended, that causes her to rebuke him. All of this culminates when her former lover returns from the war to fall into her arms at an inconvenient moment when her other 2 courtiers also choose to ascend on Camilla's busy villa. Renoir wrote the story and worked on the screenplay, and although he had 4 co-writers, he has said that his muse and co-creator on the project was composer Antonio Vivaldi. He worked on the screenplay while listening to records of the musician's work, and paced the scenes around some of Vivaldi's pieces. Indeed, the entire soundtrack is exclusively Vivaldi's work. Although Renoir welcomed working in France again, making the film was not quite the bed of roses he may have expected. His star, Anna Magnani, allegedly appreciated the nightlife more than working with a professional director, and at first would fail to appear on set any time before 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Renoir eventually adamantly told her that he would rather just stop making the film than make everyone wait around for her all afternoon, and she began taking the schedule more seriously. However, when she started arriving on time, she complained her face was too puffy and the cameras were too bright, and Renoir had his cinematographer, his nephew Claude, eventually coup Magnani into thinking she was transformed with special lighting. The plan was to make 3 versions of the film, one in French, one in Italian, and one in English. Due to financial constraints, the French version was scrapped, and since Renoir publicly favored the English version, it remains the one that is widely available today. After The Golden Coach was released in 1953, Renoir immediately started making 2 more films in Europe. The remaining 2 of the trilogy, French Can-Can, the story of a rising star at the famous Moulin Rouge nightclub, and Elena and Her Men, starring Ingrid Bergman as a Polish socialite in a love triangle with 2 French officers. Renoir would linger in France for several years, dabbling in theater and even making a made-for-television horror movie called Experiment in Evil, before eventually returning to his home in Beverly Hills and dying at the age of 84 in 1979. What did I think of The Golden Coach? I admit, dear listeners, this is one I wasn't looking forward to seeing. The alleged spectacle of a 1950s Technicolor drama comedy set in the 18th century just didn't draw me in, and my fears seemed to be confirmed when the movie opened, as though it was a play being filmed. Someday, hopefully, I'll have the chance to tell you of another movie, Henry V, which was made the same way and becomes the bane of the movies in the book for me. These fears were allayed about 10 minutes in, however, when I realized this was in no way some sort of experimental film, but an actual comedy. As the movie progresses, Camilla's situation becomes more and more desperate, and the story soon becomes a kind of French farce, with the otherwise noble viceroy attempting to hide Camilla from his former fiancée and vice versa. I admit that I never laughed out loud at any of this, but I'll be damned if it held my attention for 103 minutes without me having to look at the timer on the DVD player. The highlight of the film for me was the performance of Anna Magnani, which makes Renoir's stories of her behavior on set all the more surprising. It's clear that Camilla's first passion is the theater, with her love affairs taking a back seat. Initially, she comes off as a spoiled brat visiting a new and less opulent world, picture Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, but after some lengthy and slightly bawdy musical numbers, we see her charming naivety as she finds herself spinning into the arms of the rich but humble viceroy. At its heart, The Golden Coach is a commentary on how art ultimately affects life and vice versa. At the conclusion, when Camilla has shunned her earthly desires, donated the Golden Coach to the church, and realized that her true calling is the theater, she declares that her 3 former suitors are now part of the audience. She is, after all, part of a traveling entourage that will presumably soon leave Peru and go on to another small town with a new cast of characters, and Camilla will eventually step off the stage to be enmeshed in the locals' lives, only to make them part of a growing audience at the end. And so on, and so on. I doubt very much that Renoir meant for this message to be as introspective or autobiographical as, say, Federico Fellini's films, but it's not so ham-fisted that I don't appreciate it. The film is indeed a fun, light, and interesting little comedy, and I look forward to drawing more of Jean Renoir's work from the book in future episodes. That's all I have to say about The Golden Coach. Tune in next week when we talk about Billy Wilder's noir 1951 classic, Ace in the Hole, starring Kirk Douglas. In the meantime, you can email me any questions or comments at 1001moviespodcast@gmail.com, follow me on Twitter at 1001moviespc, and look for the podcast's Facebook page. Until next time, happy viewing.